future that you fight for. Maybe no one gets to reach that perfect day if the work is never over. And how do you keep marching anyway? Do you carry your banner as far as you can, rewriting the world with your imperfect pen, till the next stubborn girl picks it up in a picket line over and over again, and you join in the chorus of centuries chanting to her? The path will be twisted and risky and slow, but keep marching, keep marching. Will you fail or prevail? Well, you may never know, but keep marching, 'cause your ancestors are all the proof you need that progress is possible, not guaranteed. It will only be made if we keep marching on. Keep marching on. Keep marching on. And remember every mother that you came from. Learn as much from our successes, our mistakes. Don't forget you're merely one of many others on the journey every generation makes. We did not end in justice, and neither will you, but still we made strides, so we know you can too. Make peace with our incomplete power and use it for good, 'cause there's so much to do. The gains will feel small and the loss is too large. Keep marching, keep marching. You'll rarely agree with whoever's in charge. Keep marching, 'cause your ancestors are all the proof you need that progress is possible, not guaranteed. It will only be made if we keep marching on. Keep marching on. Yes, the world can be changed. We've done it before, so keep marching, keep marching. We're always behind you, so bang down the door and keep marching, and let history sound the alarm of how the future demands that we fight for it now. It will only be ours if we keep marching on. Come on, keep marching, marching, marching. 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 Keep marching on. Thank you so much and welcome.
Good evening. How do you follow that? Oh, no, I'm not going to sing. My family would not let me do that. Good evening and welcome to the Tenement Museum's Gala, City of Immigrants, City of Migrants, holding up the torch. Thank you to our Gala sponsors, to our wonderful board members. Thank you especially to our Gala co-chairs, Meryl Snow-Zegar and Michelle Merman. And thank you to all of you here tonight, gathered here to help us form a community. And thank you also to the people online, watching from places as far as Finland and Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Hi, Mom. All of you have helped us form this Tenement Museum community, and already you are helping us hold up the torch. I am so grateful to Shayna Taub for performing Keep Marching. Taub's Tony. Taub's Tony Award-winning Suffs is about the women's movement, and Keep Marching so beautifully captures the conversation between past and present that can happen when one knows one's history. When one learns of how our ancestors identified gaps in the nation's ideals and its reality, and then struggled to bridge the gap, that knowledge fuels the ongoing fight, even, or precisely when, the path will be twisted and risky and slow. I cannot think of a more fitting dynamic to launch this evening as we consider how history can offer us strength. What were the conversations in the past that challenged us to become a better country? This past fall, the Tenement Museum held the torch to explore the long and complicated history of the Statue of Liberty. We highlighted two surprising but important facts about the statue. Number one, though today we associate the statue with immigration, and often with Emma Lazarus's poem, The New Colossus, the connection between the statue, the poem, and immigration did not really enter the broader public consciousness until the 1930s, ironically, just after the doors had closed. Number two, the French thinkers who originally conceived of the statue in 1865 did so in order to mark the abolition of slavery. Indeed, Bartholdi, the statue's sculptor, created maquettes in 1870 in which the statue held broken shackles, a reminder of the slavery. But in the next version of the maquette, he replaced the chains with a document marking 1776, a nod to the then upcoming centennial celebration of the Declaration of Independence, which you know what it is. On the celebration and unveiling of the statue in October 1886, dignitaries delivered speeches. Barely any mention was made of immigration and none of slavery. Instead, the million people gathered in Lower Manhattan celebrated the marvelous feat of engineering, Franco-American friendship, and a more abstract sense of liberty. But the historical record shows that several people found that the disconnect between liberty and their daily reality was too large to remain silent. These are people who are not famous today, they are not mentioned in textbooks, but they held up the torch early on, starting important conversations with the statue and the American people. And it is those conversations with the statue that prove so important to us today. Sam Sung-bo, a Chinese American, noted the contradiction between the Statue of Liberty and the Chinese Exclusion Act that Congress had just passed in 1882. He wrote, "That statue represents liberty holding a torch, which lights the passage of those of all nations who come into this country. But are the Chinese allowed to come? As for the Chinese who are here, are they allowed to enjoy liberty as men of all other nationalities enjoy it? Whether this statute against the Chinese or the statue to liberty will be the more lasting monument to tell future ages of the liberty and greatness of this country will be known only to future generations." A suffragist, Lily Devereaux Smith, incensed that no women had been invited to the formal ceremonies on Liberty Island, chartered a boat, docked it near the island, and at an opportune time, pulled out a bullhorn and to give a speech from its deck that included the following observation: "In erecting a statue of liberty embodied as a woman in a land where no woman has political liberty, men have shown a delightful inconsistency which excites the wonder and admiration of the opposite sex." The Cleveland Gazette, a Black newspaper, wondered how, in the retreat from Reconstruction and the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, the country could seriously celebrate liberty, shove the Bartholdi statue, torch and all, into the ocean, until the liberty of this country is such as to make it possible for an inoffensive and industrious colored man in the South to earn a respectable living for himself and family without being Ku Kluxed, perhaps murdered, his daughter and wife outraged, and his property destroyed. Over time, these conversations with the statue pushed the country in better directions into a fuller, if yet incomplete, beacon of liberty. Women gained the right to vote, Congress repealed the Chinese Exclusion Act, and the civil rights movement propelled us forward. And still, if we have the courage to truly hold up the torch, we must concede that the work is not done. We need to engage in more conversations with the statue. over the meaning of liberty and what it means to be American. At that Tenement Museum program last fall, Clint Smith, the award-winning poet and writer, put it beautifully. He said, "The statue and the texts that are associated with it allow us to aspire to a version of ourselves that we are not yet aligned with, but that we can hope to get a little bit closer to." We can be proud of the beautiful ideals embodied by the statue and in the poem, but we need to teach this expansive history so as to inspire all the necessary conversations. Our American history offers examples of those who pushed the statue and the nation to better meet its ideals. They understood and they acted on Emma Lazarus's observation, "We are none of us free until all of us are free." Today, as storm clouds obscure the torch and threaten the humanities, we must illuminate this history. At the Tenement Museum, we also hold up the torch by sharing and listening to each other's stories, thereby creating the community needed for real conversations. About a decade ago, we realized that we could never find a tenement big enough or the funds enough to tell every group's story or every individual story. We thus created an online archive, Your Story, Our Story, and invited visitors and students of all ages and backgrounds to contribute a photo of an object and a paragraph describing how the object told a piece of their family's migration or cultural story. Today, we have over 16,000 stories from every state in the nation. If you type, once in a while, I'll be at home and I'll search a word, just randomly, a search in this database. I'll type in blanket or stew or mother. And what will happen is dozens and dozens of stories from across the nation and from different cultures appear on the screen, showing us that there is so much more that connects us than divides us. This audience tonight is a testament to the community forged by Your Story, Our Story. Several of the professors who pioneered Your Story, Our Story in their respective classrooms have since become Tenement trustees. And I cannot imagine our board without Christina Greer, Nancy Foner, May Nye, and Margaret Chin. As May's student at Columbia in 2015, Cora Cervantes wrote a stunning story about a comal her grandmother gave her mother before leaving Mexico, and how that comal kept them connected through countless meals. Cora is here with us tonight, and she brought her younger cousins who had less time with their grandmother, but learned about her through the story Cora had written a decade ago. PS 130 in Kensington, Brooklyn was the first school that we partnered with to create Your Story, Our Story, and I'm very proud that tonight we have a graduate of PS 130 here with us tonight. She wrote a story of her great-great-grandmother's Sabbath candlesticks, and I have another connection because those were my great-grandmother's candlesticks, so she's my daughter, but you know, still. We also welcome tonight students from Brooklyn International High School. Arlenis, Julissa, Ilya, Arika, Nani, and you'll hear more from them tonight, but I'm so happy they're here with us. Yes. These students and our honorees tonight help us hold up the torch. Muzaffar Chishti, a director at the Migration Policy Institute, has helped the Tenement Museum and the nation illuminate how immigration laws have profoundly shaped our society, and he always has a new perspective to share. Dr. Elizabeth Alexander, president of the Mellon Foundation, will receive our inaugural Gina Manuel Award for elevating untold stories and making them part of our national narrative. Andy Berkman. Andy Berkman's longtime service to our board has profoundly brightened all of our lives with his sage advice, counsel, and good humor, and he will receive the Founders Award. Andy also reminds me of my favorite Yiddish word, which is seichel. Not bagel, but seichel. And seichel, I think, means, my understanding of seichel is someone who just has really amazing street smarts and common sense, but also a kind of elegant worldview to bring it all together. And so it's just a delight to honor him tonight. We're profoundly grateful to the way he has led the board in expanding our museum while also staying true to our roots. Thank you to our honorees and everyone here in the Tenement community for holding up the torch.
I visited the Tenement Museum a couple times, and the most significant visit was an early one with my second granddaughter. And she said, "Gee, Pa, how many people lived in this apartment?" I said, 6 or 7. And I said, "Rose, your bedroom is larger than the entire apartment, which all these people and my grandfather and my father and his siblings, 6, lived in that apartment. And the building stands today, 131 Henry Street. So, literally around the corner. My father was born in 1906. It's inconceivable to me that my father, as a young boy, wasn't running up and down this block daily. It's a story not dissimilar from many of the late 19th century Jewish immigrants who came to the Lower East Side from Eastern Europe. This is a sack that contained his tefillin. It's a real tangible connection that brings our family life back 125 years. This tefillin traveled across the ocean from the old world to the new. The laying on of tefillin is binding you to your God and to your history. And in its own way, this 130-year-old object binds us to them. It carries through the ages, and it's something that was important enough to my father to keep it so that it would become and remain a tangible object in the hands of his descendants, his children and his children's children. It's so important to see what preceded all of us. We all try to deepen that, we being my cohort, my generation, to make sure that the kids know that there's generations that have come together to put us where we are now. This tefillin, in some ways, it represents the torch of liberty. It represents freedom of religion and freedom of association and all the things that all of us, whether we think of them on a regular basis or not, hold dear, and it's that which the Tenement Museum celebrates.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Alice Yerk, and as a co-chair of the Tenement Museum's Board of Trustees, along with my fellow co-chair, Peter Levin, it is our great pleasure to welcome you all here tonight to thank our Gala co-chairs, Meryl Snow-Zegar and Michelle Merman, for all of their hard work and dedication, thank all of you for your tremendous support, and last but certainly not least, to honor our longtime and beloved fellow trustee, Andrew Berkman. For many years, Andy served as a leading real estate attorney, and he just retired last December as counsel for Milstein Properties. Here's a fun fact about Andy, or at least a bodacious rumor. He might be a distant relative of Alexander Berkman, a noted anarchist, a friend with benefits of fellow noted anarchist Emma Goldman, and an attempted assassin. When I first learned that about Andy, I knew that we would be fast friends, and that his serving on the Tenement Museum Board would never have a dull moment. During his more than 12 years as a trustee of the Tenement Museum, Andy has co-chaired the Engagement and Cultivation Committee, first with me and then with fellow trustee Margaret Chin, interviewing and welcoming many trustees, and we are deeply grateful for his service. And here's another fun fact, and this one is indisputably true. Of the 31 trustees currently on the board, 25 were interviewed by Andy, and here's one of them.
Being interviewed by Andy involves riding the elevator to the top of the Yale Club, where he holds gentle and amiable court at the roof terrace, and then spending an hour in the company of a warm, humorous, intelligent, and curious person who is, as you've just seen, an ideal representative of the museum. All anyone has ever said at the end of that hour is, "Where do I sign?" As someone who became a public school teacher after being a lawyer, I was delighted to learn at my interview that Andy was a public school teacher before he became a lawyer. He is still a teacher of the first order, and my colleagues and I are grateful to have benefited from his wisdom. On behalf of all of us on the Board of Trustees, it is my great pleasure to thank Andy and to present him with this year's Founders Award in recognition of his splendid service to the museum. Andy?
Thank you all. It's a treat to be here. It's been a long road since Morris and Alan Weiler talked to me 14 years ago about, I served on another not-for-profit, and we were terminating our charter. We had some money left over, and Alan and Morris said, well, find a way to give it to the TM. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. And the no good deed goes unpunished category, here I am 14 years later. So I want to weave together three separate strands that culminate in my being one of this year's Tenement Museum honorees. The first is that my father was born on August 10, 1906, 3 blocks from the museum. And it is inconceivable to me that during his childhood, he did not regularly walk the Orchard Street block between Broome and Delancey. Thus, when I attend events, meetings, conferences at the museum, I am always distinctly aware that I am coming to a place that was familiar to my father as a youngster well over a century ago. The second strand. In 1988, my partner, John Zuccotti, my law partner, John Zuccotti, was asked to assist our original TM founders, that's Ruth Abram and Anita Jacobson, in some of the initial legal work required to launch the museum. John sat on the first board of directors, and I was peripherally involved then in some of the necessary real estate documentation. Years later, when I became directly involved with the museum, I once sat with Ruth at a meeting at the Henry Street Settlement House when Ruth said to me that she and Anita thought they were going to open and operate a museum of oppression. To their collective surprise, they quickly determined that they had founded and were operating a museum that showcases not oppression at all, but rather opportunity. We now know that a succession of our tenants found our housing at 97 Orchard to be a springboard to later opportunity when they were able, as my father did, to get to the promised land, the Bronx. And people went to Brooklyn and spread out from there. The third strand involves a comment that the mother-in-law of one of my close friends made to him on the occasion of his 65th birthday. His birthday is coincident with mine. And she said, if you're lucky, and if you retain your health and your marbles, I'm paraphrasing, she said it much more elegantly than I have. These next 20 years will be the best of your life. That would take us to age 85. I'm not quite there, but an enormous part of these 16 best years since our 61st birthdays, for me, has come as a result of my deep professional involvement with the Milstein family and the work all of us, Tenement Museum officers, directors, staff, trustees, all work together to keep the museum at the forefront of similar institutions in America. The opportunities I have had since my birth, just before D-Day in 1944, have been immense. I've been guided by Kathy, whether by my, our, or her intuition, for more than 60 years. And I have found that my children, both of whom are with me tonight, with Kathy and me, and grandchildren, of which one is representing the 5, teach me new ways of looking at things. And thus, these last 16 years of family life, professional life, and involvement with the museum have provided the loom to weave these 3 strands into a coherent whole. Annie and Morris Vogel, past and current presidents of the museum under whom I have served, as well as past and current trustees and staff of the museum, have served to educate me, to inspire me, and to prompt me to continue work on an educational project for the museum. To all of them, each and every one, although not named individually, I say thanks, thanks, thanks. This museum celebrates the best of the difficult times following our tenants. Over the years, we probably had, 30 to 50,000 tenants, our tenants' introduction to America. And while the ongoing American experience remains a long way from perfection, our collective efforts at the museum will hopefully demonstrate to an increasingly wider audience that the course of immigration to New York and the wide embrace of our disparate customs has contributed extensively to our collective well-being. Thank you.
March 6, 1989, Ms. Ruth J. Abram, Curator, the Tenement Museum, 97 Orchard Street, New York, New York. Dear Ms. Abram, I am a longtime listener at WNYC-AM radio. What a delight as an old New Yorker to hear that at last the history of my family and my old New York will be preserved. After hearing that the records in the old Customs House and Boss Tweed's building were either lost to us or already lost to us, I am overjoyed to hear of your work and that of your group. Having said that, I would like to relate a few facts. My ancestors go back in the city as far as oral history goes, to the 1700s. I and my mother, uncles and cousins remember that grandmother and great-grandmother and father were dwellers in the tenements of old New York City and lived on Minetta Lane, Prince Street. The men worked at the old South Street Seaport, and they attended the St. Patrick's Church. Some were born in St. Joseph Church's Infirmary. They related to us how water came in by wagon from upstate. They related how the department stores, Macy's and others, were downtown. We lived in tenements with gas lights and coal stoves. They were African Americans, and their names were Lawrence, Nolan, and Downing. They lived in the tenements on the old Bowery and related to us about the old Tong gangs and how the first Catholic church, they were Catholics, was St. Anthony's in the Village. They were pushed out by the new immigrants in the beginning of the century and moved from the Lower East Side to Hell's Kitchen, Chelsea, the Tenderloin, West 40s, and finally to the West 50s, which was called Old San Juan Hill. Grandpa got out the vote for Tammany. So when you are planning your museum, I beg of you, please, please don't forget them. Their spirits walk those halls, and their bones lay in the earth there, and we remember them. Most of society seems to write us off when they look at the history of New York City and America. But my people were part of New York City long before it was a city as such. Some of them, like my great-grandmother, told us about the Civil War riots when they burned down the old colored orphanage, when Lincoln Hospital, the old building, was for sick and poor slaves. They did laundry, swept chimneys, laid bricks, tarred roofs, and did serve in the army in all the wars and deserve to be remembered. Sincerely, Gina Manuel, Assistant Circulation Manager, Literary Department. P.S. Forgive typos on coffee break.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. That was a beautiful letter reading. Good evening. My name is Michael Smith, and thank you, Andy, for welcoming me onto the Tenement Museum Board in 2022. I was one of the 25 that had the infamous Yale lunch, and it was definitely unforgettable. It was great. Thanks again, Andy. We just heard actor Tamara Tooney read a letter from Gina Manuel, the museum's founder, Ruth Abram, just as she began her work in the museum in 1988. This letter, rediscovered in our museum archives several years ago, has become the centerpiece of A Union of Hope 1869 tour, which tells the story of Joseph and Rachel Moore, a Black couple who lived in the tenements, and brings to life a long-forgotten chapter of the city's history. Manuel's letter not only shed light on the day-to-day tenement life, but also on the social, communal, and political life of New York City in the 1860s. It shows us how our families, their objects, and their stories keep alive a history that isn't always kept in formal archives or printed in textbooks. It shows us how individuals like Gina Manuel can be empowered by their own family history, and now her letter is read dozens of times each day at the museum, inspiring today's students to research their own stories and helping people to see themselves and their families as a part of our nation's history. In inaugurating the first Gina Manuel Award, we knew that Dr. Elizabeth Alexander was the most fitting honoree. Early on, the Mellon Foundation understood the importance of this exhibit, and their support was crucial. And indeed, Dr. Alexander's career vividly, abundantly, and forcefully emphasizes the power of words and stories and how they illuminate both the possibility of a richer history as well as new paths to social justice. I share these words from a slightly unique vantage point, as I had the privilege of sitting at her professorial table as an undergraduate at Yale College. As a former student of Professor Alexander's, I have dear memories of her pushing us, her students, to understand the rigors of language, the nuance of history, the complexity of race, and the power of written and vocalized memory to move forward the collective human project. And having become an amateur scholar of Professor Alexander's work over the years, I dare say that is her true calling. The poet Clarence Major described it aptly when he wrote that Professor Alexander has an instinct for turning profound cultural vision into one that illuminates universal experience. I would argue it's not only an instinct, but a calling and indeed a living legacy. And as you wrote and shared, Professor Alexander, in a profound moment of collective experience, through words, anything can be made and any sentence begun. Professor Alexander, you've taught us that the beauty of deep study of history is when you realize there's not just one story, there are not just two stories. You realize the power of this country is in its multiplicity. Your reflection on stories are exactly the inspiration we need to move our country forward right now. The Tenement Museum and myself is deeply honored to present you with the inaugural Gina Manuel Award. Thank you.
Well, you want that. You want a former student to share what it felt like, the sacred time that we spent together in the classroom, where we do extraordinary things over words and books and ideas, and we struggle together, and we learn together, and we grow together, and teacher grows just as much as the students do. So thank you very, very much. And I am so honored to receive this award and very moved to be here. And so I had one set of carefully prepared remarks, and I want to read something else that feels more fitting even to the extraordinary place, the Tenement Museum. When my kids were little children in New Haven, Connecticut, the much anticipated 6th grade trip to New York was to then called the Lower East Side Tenement Museum, with a delicious sandwich afterwards. And it is a place that's been in our family for the longest time. And I think that right now, thinking about what we have to learn from our stories and the imperative of weaving our experiences together and understanding our common denominators could not be any stronger than it is now. So this is something that I wrote a few years ago that is really, really, really apt to share for this time and this place. A few weeks ago, I attended an Eritrean Orthodox Christian and American Orthodox Jewish wedding in New York City. The Eritreans came from all over the globe, where war and conflict had scattered them over the past few generations, and from all over the country. The Eritrean women came in their traditional white dresses and shawls called netzela. The men were elegant and grave in their dark Western suits. The wine glass was smashed. The Jewish family linked arms and danced in a circle. The Eritreans danced in a circle in a dance called the kuda. The Jewish men hoisted the bride high on a chair. The Eritreans ululated in the temple. It was a complex, beautiful American day. Centuries of tradition came together. The bride and groom could meet in America because war had scattered African families as the Holocaust had scattered Jewish families, and all made themselves anew in their new space. The sides of the chuppah are always open, which lets in light and air, but also people, so that the home of the newlyweds is shared and the pot of stone soup is shared, invoking the tent where Abraham welcomed visitors and angels. Let your house be wide open and open on all sides to welcome wayfarers. My side is the Eritrean side, though I am not Eritrean. My late husband was. The bride was the niece who became my daughter when she came to America at 16 to live with us. War made it impossible for her to stay where she was, and her mother said to me, "Here, she is your daughter now," while I was pregnant with what I thought was my first child. So life goes on and families expand, and the blessings and responsibilities of others come your way. Critical thinking develops when you go outside of your comfort zone, when you eat a different bread from the one you grew up with. Challah, chapati, hot water cornbread, pita, injera, baguette. How wonderful to eat a different bread, a differently spiced meal. How wonderful to sleep next to someone who might be dreaming in a language different from your own. Picture this wedding photo. My 10-year-old great-nephew, Maxie, who is Scottish and Eritrean, lives in Aberdeen, Scotland, and traveled to see his auntie get married. In the photograph, he wears a kilt in the plaid of his father's clan, and atop his head is a tartan yarmulke made especially for the occasion for him to wear in the temple. He has the sweetest shy smile you have ever seen, and he is learning to dance an Eritrean dance with the older men in the family. This is the beauty of diaspora, of culture crossing, of not knowing what is around the corner, of making life and something new after disruption. I think he may be the only Scottish Eritrean boy with a tartan skull cap in the whole wide world, but surely he is not the last. This family is my family because my husband came to the United States in 1981 from Eritrea, a small country in East Africa, after decades of an independence war and a scourge called the Red Terror. He was a refugee, a person who has been forced to leave his country to escape war, persecution, or natural disaster. What do you picture when you hear the word refugee? What are we being asked to picture as we listen to the constant description of America as an unwelcoming place, a house with doors and windows locked shut? Fikre Gebreyesus, my late husband, my refugee. He fled death squads, hid from soldiers when they broke into his home, saw classmates disappeared. This was the norm for every family he knew. At 16, he was sent away by his mother to save his life. He then journeyed on foot to Sudan, then Italy, then Germany, and from there to the United States, eventually landing in New Haven. His name was Fikre Mariam Gebreyesus. In Italy, they called him Marco. I do not know what he was called in Germany. In the United States, he was called Freddie by the owner of the local Chinese herb shop, who was named Li Biao and who most of New Haven called Bill. He was called Fiore by New Haven Italian Americans, holding on to their own mother tongue in a new space. And here is what he did when he came to the United States. He worked usually 3 not particularly enjoyable jobs at a time requiring multiple bus trips, long and lonely nights, and then he made friends. And then he became part of his community. And then he built and enriched that community. Fikre considered himself African American, African, Eritrean, East African, Asmarino, human. He lived in those identities. He had read more books than anyone I knew, spoke 8 languages, started a restaurant that fed a community for years, and made 882 paintings, some of which have been shown all over the country and the world. He became a United States citizen, and we went to the ceremony in the New Haven courthouse, and I saw in the world that was there a premise and promise of America. I thought about the phrase radical welcome. Fikre lived with anxiety that never left him, though he was the most joyful man anyone who knew him ever knew. After the September 11th attacks, when brown people and people with unusual last names were being rounded up, he would break into an anxious sweat most days, worried that he was no longer secure in what was now his country, that he might be separated from me and from his beloved sons. He once sat on a tree stump in the backyard of our home, so far from where he grew up, and said, "Baby, it may sound funny, but this feels like Africa to me." One of my sisters-in-law, also a refugee, began a new life from scratch in the United States before her husband and remaining child at home could join her. She left everything material behind in Ethiopia. Home, car, furnishings, jewelry. A few things eventually made their way back to her. She'd get a call to meet a plane at Kennedy Airport, and a package of something precious would come. Spices, fabric. Back in the day, chicken. A packet of documents. The chickens tasted different there, she said. American chicken, no good. The best was when her small coffee table came with compartments for coffee cups and a small rug made of artificial grass. She did the sacred Eritrean coffee ceremony and for a moment was no longer a refugee, but rather a woman performing the rituals she had performed all her life. "I am home now," she said, as she poured us cup after cup of coffee. For what is the meaning of life, after all? Then coffee and tea and talk with loved ones. What is home to a refugee? I never took home for granted, but it never occurred to me that I might not have my home. "I don't want the children to be refugees," my husband would say, and we'd share a dark, knowing laugh. "No, I don't want the children to be refugees. But I do want them to know," he said, "what refugees know, that you can make your life from scratch. I want the children to have the strength and wile of survivors. We refugees, he said, by which he meant we refugees who survive. Yes, he was mine, and now I sing his song, but he was also no different from so many other refugees who have to leave their home. People with names some make little effort to pronounce, who continue to build America. Nor am I any different from the millions of people who fell in love and made family here. Ficre's presence in my life reminds me of the limits and dangers of nationalism everywhere, that families can be torn apart for generations, and that in the words of the poet W.H. Auden, we must love one another or die. And in the story of Ficre is the lesson that we are impoverished if we remain strangers to one another, and that what makes this country unique is that the world is in it. Ficre left this earth too early, so it is my job to tell his American story. I offer this story to ask, will we build homes with open sides that welcome wayfarers into our lives? So that's what I wanted to say to us all tonight, because we share so much. And even in our differences, we have to remember what we share and remember the stories and the histories that are contained in this museum and that enable all of us not only to tell our family stories, but to listen to the stories of others and weave them with our own. So this is really a great honor. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share these words, and thank you so very much.
When my grandma passed away, she left them for my mom and my dad's brother's wife. Because there are only two brothers, so she left them for their wife. And then my mom gave me this one.
Okay. It's beautiful. So let's come back together. Yeah, what connections did you make? What did you learn from reading each other's stories?
All our objects are like very specific to some place, but they all have similarity with others.
The Your Story, Our Story project is this idea that we all have stories and that sharing those stories can help us connect to our history and to each other.
Your Story, Our Story is the Tenement Museum's digital exhibit. Anyone in any part of the United States can contribute a story to this online platform that together hosts 16,000 stories of objects and traditions that tell us a piece of someone's cultural identity. This project has been going since 2015, so it's now in its 10th year, and we have stories from all 50 states.
If you look at the map, we can see where all the different stories are coming from. So your story is part of this now.
A lot of the stories in Your Story, Our Story are contributed by students.
I wrote about a dress that my grandma actually sewed throughout when she was making it. We kind of had this tradition every single afternoon. We would sit down and then she would always talk to me. And she actually told me a lot about her background.
I chose Mentorita. My grandfather's side of my family are from Ica, is in South Lima. They used to believe in this woman, a Franciscan, who take care of sick people and poor people. We will have this celebration with my whole family, like the entire family.
For my story, I wrote about our family menorah that I brought from Russia with me when I came here. I saw menorah and I'm like, this will be a great story. Like, it probably was passed through generations. And I come to my mom and started asking about this menorah and oh, how did we get it? And my mom we bought it. And bought it? Yes, in 2008. I thought you brought it from Azerbaijan. My mom told me, no, it was Soviet Union. You could not have objects like that. For Judaism, it's very important idea of light. In my mind, I just got this image of dark Soviet Union without any light. And I decided to write about this.
I've always thought of symbolism when I teach history and symbols and objects. My students were all English language learner, recent immigrants, the more visual the better. When I bumped into Your Story, Our Story and saw that they were doing object immigrant stories, it was a perfect fit. It was an easy match. I feel like everybody has something that they could talk about, that they could hold in their hand, that they can touch, they can smell, that has a memory attached to it.
Your Story, Our Story for students, we hope, begins with a connection to the Tenement Museum. At the Tenement Museum, we connect students to the idea that objects tell important stories, not only about who we are and who our families are, but objects also tell us important stories about American history.
You can go in the bedroom.
Yeah. This apartment is recreated to the year 1916. In this apartment, we focus the story on the only daughter living in this apartment, Victoria Confino, and she was 14 in the year 1916. She would call this her manta. This was something that she brought from her home country. She would spread this out on the floor and sleep on it, but does anyone recognize, right? Maybe you have things like this, but it's made from the hair of a goat.
That museum is a tool to be on the shoes of those people who live like back in the days. I thought that I was walking through the real place. When something becomes real for you, it has more importance.
Yeah. Every time I visit museum or like place like this, I wonder maybe in 100 years later, people are gonna see us as like people from back in the day.
And now it's like there's this time in this country where so many people are like so afraid of diversity or like afraid or like hateful towards people who are different from them. You all are teaching future historians about your experiences and we hope helping to open their minds, right? Your stories are part of this museum collection. What do you want other people to learn about your story?
That people see immigrants as alien, whatever. But, you know, these objects that we have for our stories, like love is really important to us. So I want people to learn the importance of that. We're not aliens or illegal people. You know, all of us are human. We have history, we have story, we have like own identity. So I want people to open their eyes.
Even when we are like different cultures, we have something in common, that is that one thing that can be important, it's passing by generation and generation. We have a lot of stories in our countries that we live those items, those stories, those cultures there and back in our countries, but have the opportunity to share that here in the United States with other people from other cultures, from other countries, is an opportunity and it's a reminder that you don't leave that important part of yourself in your country. It's still with you.
When I actually told my grandma about the story that I was gonna write, she was proud of it, one, because she raised me, and because she was telling me that I was actually putting my voice out there, something that she was not able to do.
We hope that when people read each other's Your Story, Our Story entries, not only that they feel connected to each other, but that they find inspiration for moving forward and find understanding for how ultimately there's more that connects us than divides us.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Michelle Merman. I'm a trustee of the museum and co-chair of this fabulous evening with fellow trustee Merrill Snow Zagar. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and congratulations to our amazing honorees. My family came to America in the late 1890s to early 1900s. They were fleeing the repression of Eastern Europe. My father's grandparents came from Odessa in 1898 with 5 little boys. They moved, where else, but to the Lower East Side, into a tiny flat at 148 Forsyth Street, and they opened a dry goods store at 73 Eldridge Street, right down the block from where my beloved Joe and I got married at a synagogue that had opened just a few years before my great-grandparents landed. There is no question in my mind that my great-grandparents prayed at that synagogue. My great-uncles came from the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the early 1900s, each when they reached 17. They each came alone and met their brothers when they arrived. They were escaping anti-Semitism. They were tailors and they boarded, where else but at 106 Orchard Street, directly across from what was to become the Tenement Museum. My family came with nothing. Their education was nil, but their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren became doctors, teachers, accountants, lawyers, social workers, computer science engineers, business owners, one astroscientist, and a PhD in AI. That is my story. When I walk through the Tenement Museum, I see my story. Scratch any of us and we find our immigrant and migrant past. The museum memorializes for me how little we started with and then shows us, by tracing the families who lived there, that given a chance, just a chance, we can overcome, succeed, and flourish. It is a physical reminder that we are a nation of what our children call newcomers. And newcomers bring the unique knowledge, creativity, intelligence, views, and drive that made our nation succeed and evolve and continues to do so. And the museum works hard. Our wonderful Annie, educators, support staff, trustees, officers, Liddy Chu and Ian Patrick, they work very hard to deliver our programs. Over 16,000 visitors have added their stories to Your Story, Our Story, just like the stories you heard from the Brooklyn International High School students. 30,000 K-12 students, their teachers and families visit the museum every year. Nearly 5,000 students from 25 states across the country visit the museum in virtual field trips. 430 teachers who reached over 26,000 students in New York City participated in our training programs in the last 2 years. And the museum subsidizes field trips, teacher training, research, and curricular resources. This work takes time, care, and money, so I'm asking for your support. Our goal for last year's gala night was $100,000. We reached it and we surpassed it, and with that, we were able to raise over $1 million to continue the work for the museum. I am hoping that we can again reach our $100,000 goal at tonight's gala and bring the total we raised to over $1 million. Several trustees have already pledged $27,000 in honor of Andy. And to get the giving going tonight, I myself am pledging $10,000 toward our goal. So we are that much closer. For those of you at City Winery, there are pledge cards at each table. You can make a gift by either scanning the QR code on the pledge card or filling the card out and handing it to one of our staff. They will be walking around to collect the cards. For those of you at home, you can make a gift by following the link in the chat. And you can make pledges throughout the evening. I want to remind you that your gift translates into concrete support for our programs. A $10,000 gift enables thousands of K-12 students to visit the museum. A $5,000 gift helps teachers connect with experts and scholars. $2,500 inspires students and teachers to document their stories in Your Story, Our Story. $1,500 helps New York City public school students bring their families to the museum free of charge. $500 goes toward free Sunday museum admission for New York City public school teachers. $250 provides teachers with resources that extend our tenement stories into their classrooms. By supporting the museum, you give our children a priceless gift. Their stories for posterity in the museum's oral history project, Your Story, Our Story, and concrete proof that each of us, no matter our circumstances, can indeed overcome, succeed, and flourish. Thank you all for your generosity.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Eleanor Pelta, and I'm a proud trustee of the Tenement Museum. And tonight, it's my pleasure to present the Holding Up the Torch Award to Muzaffar Chishti. Over the course of my career as an immigration lawyer, I've helped the best and the brightest from all corners of the world to come to our country to live, work, and become American citizens. And the best and the brightest includes people from all walks of life, from all trades, people who come to the US to do quantum supercomputing, and people who fix our roads and bridges in the middle of the night. As we know from the stories that the Tenement Museum tells, what immigrants bring to our country in their journey to become American is our secret sauce. It truly is what strengthens us and makes us great. Immigration lawyers, in a certain sense, are the midwives of the journey of the experience that was so beautifully described by our other honoree, Dr. Alexander, just a few minutes ago. It's often hard and challenging, but it's always a privilege. When I was a young immigration lawyer, I worked on litigation aimed at ensuring that President Reagan's amnesty program, yes, President Reagan's amnesty program, helped as many people to secure legal status as Congress intended it to. There were a number of high-profile immigration lawyers and activists involved and interested in that litigation, and I felt privileged to be working with some of the rock stars of my profession. Muzaffar Chishti was one of them. Muzaffar Chishti first came to this country from India. Prior to joining the Migration Policy Institute, he was a lawyer in the US labor movement and worked with the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, where he was the first director of its National Immigration Policy Project, which helped 3,000 workers gain legal status under IRCA, under that amnesty program in the 1980s. He is a nationally renowned expert on US immigration policy and law who has testified extensively on immigration policy issues before Congress. He is also frequently asked to comment on immigration policy by local and national media. He is a recipient of the US Citizenship and Immigration Services recognition as an outstanding American by choice, the New York State Governor's Award for Outstanding Asian Americans, and the Ellis Island Medal of Honor. And today, it is my great pleasure to award him the Holding Up the Torch Award on behalf of the Tenement Museum.
I was born in a place called Kashmir, which is the northernmost part of India. Most things about growing up, I think of my mother. I mean, I strangely think that everything good that happens in my life is a blessing from my mother. When I came to the US to go to law school, I had literally $250 in traveler's checks. That was my entire asset. So you first lived frugally. The object I brought relevant to this is this thing called the kangri, and it essentially is a heating pot. And you put unburned coal in this first. On top of that, you put burnt coal and a little ash, so it keeps on giving day-long heating supply to you. Kashmir is a multi-religious society, Buddhists, Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims. That one thing every Kashmiri household would have, whether you're from any religion or economic class, would be a kangri. At our home in New York, this is a decorative element. I don't think we have actually ever used it. We're not burning coal at home, but we keep it along with other decorative elements to remind our daughters and our visitors to our home that this is what Kashmiri culture would be like. We decided very consciously that we would spend some time in India. We lived in the same house with my parents, so they got to see how my parents and therefore the extended family actually lived on a day-to-day basis. I'm glad that they got that experience firsthand, but also my parents kept on visiting the US every other year. That's exactly what the Tenement Museum does. You can't keep the old reality intact, that's gone. But what you preserve is the memory of the old reality.
Versus a Russian Yiddish Jew.
Immigration is an abstract issue. The contribution of immigrants is not abstract, it's real. No country has benefited from immigration as much as US has. It's only in the stories that you can make those experiences concrete. History repeats itself. It doesn't always go in a straight line, but the arc of history is, I think, on the side of immigrants. The same way as we became a unique nation, in the past, the same forces are relevant for our future.
You see these tenement buildings all throughout the neighborhood.
And kids have to know it more than anyone else because the future belongs to them.
Thanks for joining me on my intimate little living room here. We wanted to make sure that we were able to pull out as much wisdom from both of you as possible. So wanted to kind of have this little panel. I promise we will get to dessert, but this is the kind of the dessert of the program. There's a lot going on in this country right now, and Muz, you ended in this video. You talked about that that immigration is abstract, but the contributions of immigrants are real. Tell us what we need to do to get that message out.
Well, thanks so much for doing this.
And there's a microphone right next to you. Is there one right behind you? There we go, sorry.
Is it working? Yes. Yeah, thank you so much, and it was so easy to accept this award, not only because of my huge admiration for Tenement Museum, but it was where I didn't have to give a speech. So thank you for that. I think what I meant in that comment in that film is that when people think, and this became much more clear in this election, which will go down as a highly consequential election and made consequential because President Trump made immigration his signature issue. We just cannot escape that. All of us have to acknowledge that he thinks, whether the country thinks or no, whether we think or no, He's absolutely convinced that he won the election in 2016 and he won the election again in 2024 on the issue of immigration. And how he sold it to the country, in my view, was that immigration was out of control, that we were under siege at the border. And people who looked at the sort of the chaotic pictures of the border so bought it. But that's immigration in abstract. You don't meet those immigrants from the border. You don't meet the disorder. But they get sold on that. What we know, on the other hand, are immigrants. What we know, on the other hand, are people that you students that you saw. These are the future of our country. They come from diverse backgrounds. Their parents may come from the spectrum of skills that immigrants bring to our country, from high-skilled doctors and computer engineers to farm workers and garment workers, where I had the privilege of getting experience of immigration policy and politics. And when people, you ask them, who took care of your older grandmother in the nursing home? Who took care of your infant child? It's frequently an immigrant. So then it doesn't become abstract. Then it becomes real. So I always tell people, if you really have to talk about immigration, you have to talk about immigrants and not about immigration policy.
And talk about people, and talk about stories. And Elizabeth, you got out of a video. So we don't know what your object is. If you had an object that could tell your family's migration, immigration story, what would that object be?
Okay, yes. That was such a hard and such a great question because there are so many objects. And the one that I landed on is my paternal grandfather, Clifford Alexander, came from Jamaica in 1918 and came to Harlem, USA. My parents were Harlemites. That is where I was born as well. And so there was that one grandfather, and then the other grandparents were great migrants. 6 million people in the Great Migration, the largest internal movement of human beings. It's an extraordinary movement in this country. So I think that even though immigration talks about crossing national boundaries, we also have to think about the extraordinariness of these black people who came from the South, leaving often, violence, state-sanctioned violence, in order to make themselves anew in the North. So my people came from Alabama and North Carolina and Jamaica. My grandfather was a wonderful man who was somewhat taciturn and who was very much in the forward-moving action of doing and building community in Harlem. He was the building manager at the Riverton Apartments in Harlem. That is where I was born. And so he didn't tell a lot of backwards-looking stories. And before he died a good death at 92, never sick a day in his life, one day said, "I don't feel so good." And then, we all had a chance to say goodbye, and then he just left this earth in one gesture. It was a very beautiful thing. I started asking him questions because the poet child is the one who asks the questions. And he had never told the story. He said, "I stowed away on a United Fruit Company banana boat." He said, "That's how I came here." I said, "Okay, well, that's interesting." And he said, I had only ever heard about his mother. He said, "My father died in the great earthquake in Jamaica. The ground opened up and took him in the earth with his goat and snapped back shut. That was the last I saw him." And then in that conversation also told me that his father was a Sephardic Jewish merchant. This is not uncommon in Jamaica in the late 1890s. He was born in 1898. And all of this was like weeks before he left this earth forever with no one else to tell his tales.
But you got it.
So what I found in his papers was a slip of passage on the United Fruit Company boat. He paid, he didn't stow away. So this is the point of the stories, right? Is that he wanted this curious child to think that it was an adventure story. He told me, in the bananas, I was in the back. It was a banana boat. But he paid, and he took the boat. So I framed this little green slip, and that is my object.
No, and we... And you don't have to do it tonight, but in the next week, we are going to get that story up on our website. It is amazing. But that's what happens a lot, is that people think they know a story, and then they go find the object, and the object reveals actually a new dimension to what the story had been. Amazing. I want to go back to another part of your life that we saw. One of the I don't know if you saw as we were walking up, but the photo we used to kind of introduce you was a photo from a summer day in 1982, and you are in Columbus Park or Mulberry Park in Chinatown, and you have a really nice outfit on. Tell us about your work. We've spoken a lot about your work at the Migration Policy Institute, but speak for a moment about that day, because it's a day, the Chinatown strike of women, that we talk a lot about at the Tenement Museum. So I'm curious, from your perspective, I've always wanted to ask you this question.
I think my daughters always get thrilled about who are here today, with my wife, about that picture, because first of all, I looked like some combination of a mob lawyer or a Bollywood extra. So I just, there was a really important moment in the history of labor movement. I think the history of Chinese history in our country, and in the history of that union. But the interesting thing about when you're in it, you don't realize that. I mean, I didn't think we were in a historic moment. I just got up that morning to show up at Columbus Park because Mei Chen, my distinguished colleague at the union who's here with us today, was a very important part of the leadership of that movement. Union, the International Ladies Garment Union, which was founded by Jewish and Italian immigrants at the turn of the 20th century. By the time I arrived there in late 70s, it had become almost all Chinese and Hispanic. And the union organized 500 Chinese factories in New York, Chinatown. And the local of that union, which I worked for, had the jurisdiction of all those 500. So for me, introduction to the US was actually strangely through Chinese factories, which is really what's interesting about our country. You don't know what entry point will bring you to experience the larger country that we know, the United States of America. And there was a strike. The employers would not accept a contract that the union had negotiated with Seventh Avenue big manufacturers, and we had to strike. And one of the insecure things about union leaders is they will call a meeting, they don't know whether people will show up. Really, it's true for all of us. You have to have some faith. So we asked all the government workers in factories that show up at work, and then all, after half an hour, would leave and come to the park, expecting that this would be the show of force. And we waited at 8:15, there's no one there at 8:30, and suddenly at 9 o'clock, the park is filled. And I had a lot of role in managing that particular event, and which did finally led to a march through Chinatown, and then a successful outcome, which many people at that time thought was the largest organizing effort by Chinese workers anywhere in the world, because there are no more Chinese workers except in People's Republic, where there's no organizing possible. So that was the significance of that event. It became a milestone in Chinese American history and in the garment industries and that great union's history.
And it was such an important moment too, because these workers, I think the Chinese contractors expected the women to side with them because of their shared culture, but the union had brought these women together who understood the importance of the union and came together.
That was sort of the great American movement. The people thought that the workers would pay much more respect to their ethnic allegiance to the employers as against their union allegiance. And here was the moment they clearly said, our affinity is with the larger workers and not with the employers who just happen to have an ethnic background. So that was a very important moment for the unions to know where they stood in the relationship to the workers they were now representing. It was also the beginning of the Chinese workers entering the American labor movement in the numbers that we had not seen before.
Yes, and we're so proud to be able to tell that story every day, dozens of times a day on our 100 Years Apart tour. Elizabeth, recently, Mellon Foundation has done such wonderful work, and we're so grateful for the support for our Union of Hope tour. But beyond just funding Union of Hope, you've done so much, and just in the last week, a wonderful announcement came out that the Mellon Foundation is stepping in to help fund the state's humanities councils after DOGE had stopped a lot of the funding that the National Endowment for the Humanities was dispersing. Tell us a little bit about your thought process and why it was important for the Mellon Foundation to step in to help these organizations.
Yeah, well, to take it back even further, I think what we believe in, at Mellon we fund arts, culture, humanities, libraries, archives, humanities and higher education, public humanities. That's what we do all day long because we believe in the power of critical thinking, we believe in the power of the word, we believe in the power of stories told in different forms, we believe in a multivocal democracy, and that only when we tell all these stories together will we even begin to understand who we are with the power of critical thinking, which is what is supposed to happen in our universities. So it all comes together, right? That's what we do, and we believe that art has superpowers that enable people to literally time travel, to travel from one body to another in empathy, to be able to understand the other and step outside of ourselves, to feel something, to laugh, to cry, to be stirred. These are superpowers. That's what we do. I have a great job all day long because that is what we support. And so with these, really, really extensive and abrupt cuts to the National Endowment of the Humanities, in every 50 state and in 6 territories, there was work that affects people's lives every day. Free college classes and poetry circles for veterans and places like the Tenement Museum. So much is supported not only by the NEH and their grants, but also by state humanities councils. And when these cuts came, some of them for money that had already been spent, my colleagues and I were getting calls after calls after calls after calls, many from people who were uncertain if they could even do the work for their communities that they had promised to do. So it was a clean thought process, which is to say, we have resources and our job is to move them. We fund the humanities, we believe in the humanities, we make the case for the humanities, and we kind of know what they are and know how to sing that song and be that Pied Piper. Sometimes it takes people a minute to say, like, scratch the humanities, what is it exactly? And we're able to, kind of go in there. And with the Federation of States Humanities Council, and that's who we very, very swiftly gave the $15 million to, we knew that they were able to make grants in each of the states that would at least, foundations cannot be a substitute for what the government does and what people have they've planned with money that was promised to them. So these are not people who are being profligate in any way, right? They were promised this money. So we were able at least to help to keep the doors open, to keep the lights on, to keep the programs happening, and to keep the extraordinary, things that people are accessing every single day available to them. It was a clean, simple decision. It was easy. What are we supposed to do with our money but something like that? And so I think the challenge was, and my colleagues executed it so beautifully, and my board executed it so beautifully, to say, like, we are doing this at the speed of light because we got to keep this work moving because the humanities are about how we are human to each other.
And you're holding up the torch. And it just strikes me, Muz, that what you have said about the importance, we started with the importance of stories for people to get to know each other and to not through thinking about immigration as abstraction, but to understanding it through stories. And it's these councils throughout the state that helps provide, whether libraries or museums, the venues for people to understand each other through stories. So I want to thank you both for the wonderful work that you do, both for the Tenement Museum selfishly and for the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now, to close out the evening, we have Meryl Snowzegar and a special guest. Come on out. Come on. Yep. We have a special guest coming. I think it looks like Lady Liberty is here to say goodnight.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for being with us this evening, whether you've joined us here in person or are joining us online across the country.
Meryl, hold up the microphone.
All right. My name is Meryl Snowzegar, and I am speaking to you now as a member of the board of the Tenement Museum, and particularly as one of this evening's Gala co-chairs, along with Michelle Merman. And since we are now approaching the end of our program this evening, I will certainly, most certainly, keep my remarks short and sweet. I join in congratulating my fellow board member, Andrew Berkman, as well as Dr. Elizabeth Alexander and Muzaffar Chishti for their well-deserved rewards received tonight. Our appreciation, quite the distraction, I know. Our appreciation goes to Elizabeth and Muzaffar also for joining with our museum's president, Annie Pollan, for such a fascinating conversation. And thanks as well to the students who shared their stories. By now, I'm certain that you're wondering who is this special young lady. Well, she was standing here beside me, sitting with Annie, who is holding up Lady Liberty's torch. Maddie, hold up the torch, sweetie. This is my beloved granddaughter, Madeline, who will be 6 years old in August. She is, she's sitting with Annie, but she was supposed to be sitting with her Mima, my grandma name, to help light the way for our next generation. For the immigrants who are here, and for those who are yet to come, because we are all immigrants or descendants of immigrants. We are a country of immigrants, and it is our great diversity of immigrants from all over the world who have together made our blended American society so great. May we continue to tell and share our diverse immigrant story as our beloved Tenement Museum does so well. Finally, thank you, sweetie. Finally, let me conclude by thanking you all, not only for joining us, but also for your generosity that will enable the museum to continue to share our stories of immigrants, migrants, and refugees, so vital to our American story and to whom we are as a nation.
Beautiful. Thank you, Meryl, and thank you, Lady Liberty. It looks like we have one more announcement. Do you want to? Let's see. Can come. Okay. Oh my goodness. So thank you to all of you for your generosity this evening. We've raised not $100,000 in the room, but we've raised $122,000. Thank you so much. Thank you for your amazing generosity and your care for the work that we do here at the Tenement Museum. And tonight, and to close this out, I need to thank a few people who really made this evening happen. In addition to our trustees, I want to thank Liddy Chu, our brilliant Chief Development Officer, my partner in crime, Chelsea Bracci, who made this program happen and made so many things happen. Never complaining. I have never heard this woman complain, ever, in 7 years of working together. I want to thank Emma Glennon, and I want to thank Melissa Boiselle for making this evening happen. And last, but certainly not least, I want to thank Ian Patrick, who you all know. I know you all know him. For the wonderful care and brilliance he devotes to this, not just to this gala, but to this museum. Thank you so much, and thank you, Lady Liberty, for lighting the torch for all of us tonight. Please enjoy dessert.